Welcome back to the third review that we're doing, but this is a full review of Arcane because Mark Zimmerman insisted on us.
We'll still be talking a lot about Act 3.
Yes, because if you missed it, please go back and take a look. We did reviews separately for Act 1 and Act 2, but now that Act 3 is out, we're going to start the video at the very least with talking about what we think of the whole show. Then we'll get into the Act 3 specifics for those that watched Act 1 and Act 2 review videos.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea because people can go back and see like, oh, during Act 2, we had concerns about how are they going to tie all this up. Yes. And as we found out shortly afterwards, well, there's going to be a second season. So a lot of the concerns that you might have had for Act 2 in that review suddenly disappear.
And I think it's a bad idea because I think people watched Act 1 and
No,
Act
I'm
2
saying it's a good idea for viewers to go back. I'm trying to push people to your other content.
Okay, great. Yeah, wow.
God damn, dude.
We did it.
Okay. All right, so I think for me, just big picture stuff right out of the way. No spoilers. If you are just tuning in out of nowhere, absolutely go watch this show. I think it is easily one of the best animated shows to come out in the last decade, amongst the all-time greats. Like, you're really talking about it pushing into that category. I think people in the community naturally want to compare it to anime. I don't actually think a lot of like the style and the way that it presents itself compares very commonly there at all. I think it is kind of a unique show in that sense where it's hard to even find something to compare it to.
Yeah.
So even if you might prefer an anime series better or Avatar: The Last Airbender better or some of these other things that people are comparing it to, none of those really translate that well.
I remember after we did our Act 1 review, you had mentioned in it that you thought it was up there with like Avatar: The Last Airbender. A friend of mine, who is a mutual friend of yours that I will not say because they said this to me privately, was like, all right, Mark is like way off his rocker. Like, where like the show's good, but like it's not at that status. And I kind of agreed that it was like early to make that assessment, but after watching the whole show, I think I would rate it up there with Avatar: The Last Airbender. Very different shows, obviously. But.
Yeah, I think the thing about it right now is that it's a single season review. And one of the things that makes Avatar: The Last Airbender so good is how well everything in that show comes together. And so there are some things that are completed art in that sense where you can say like, wow, this character's arc throughout 3 seasons was fucking amazing. Right. And you can't really make that comparison right now. So like as a single season standalone, where it's at right now compared to like the first season of Avatar: Last Airbender, which had some really weak points compared to the rest of that show, I actually don't think it's that hard to be like the first season of Arcane is maybe the best animated show ever.
Yeah.
First season. Because what else would you say is better? Like,
well, here's
gun to your head. Like what do you actually putting up?
Here's what I would say at the very least is that I don't know of anything that's a better season 1 because normally shows struggle to figure out what they are doing in the first season, whereas this show definitely did not have that struggle. They were not like obviously we'll talk about some of the missteps, and I think we don't need to rehash all the ones that we talked about in Act 1 and Act 2 because it's by no means a perfect show, but it is. I think it does a really good job of just being an amazing opening season for the show. It reminds me kind of, you have to kind of do comparisons in these things, and it's always tough because they're so wildly different. But like Game of Thrones season 1, people were like, "Wow, this show is really good from the onset." Like it didn't. It wasn't one of those shows
It needs
to
come into its own.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you're like, hey, stick around. It gets really good at like episode 6 or something like that, or like, oh, the actors figure out how to act. Like
they can really nail the characters.
Right. Yeah. And that's just not, I think, a thing.
Yeah. And my point with that was not that you can't prefer something else. Like someone in Twitch, I was just like Pokemon. I'm like, yeah, the first season of Pokemon was incredible as a children's TV show. Like, I personally prefer the first season of The Promised Neverland, but the second season went off a cliff. But you can still prefer something over this, but it's in that echelon, I think, of going to be some people's favorite show of all time. And at least you have to respect the quality of animation because it's one thing it has over everything else. They sunk a shitload of money into the animation, and it shows.
Yeah, it's had not to get too meta with our review here and talking about other reviews, but I do know that it's up among the best shows on IMDb right now. Rotten Tomatoes as well. It's not getting as many reviews. I would like it to get more reviews because I think
from critics, not audience.
Yeah, from critics. The audience score is like 96%, and almost everything usually drops off on Rotten Tomatoes as like more people get in. And, but so I think it is fair to make that assessment. Music fantastic, animation fantastic. Characters fantastic. It was really fun. I got a chance to chat very briefly with Christian Link this past weekend at Undercity Nights, which was the big thing held for all this stuff, and he's like a very understated kind of chill dude.
Yeah,
he's German, and he's like, yeah, I think we did a good job with it. Like I wanted to make sure that all the characters, like there was no just like flat characters or like like ones with like all of them have a reason and justification for their actions, even characters, and they do a good job of fleshing that all out with pretty limited time.
Yeah.
Even like a lot of the side characters, you understand why they're there, like the sheriff, for instance. And,
yeah. I feel like the characters are the best part, even though a lot of them start kind of tropey. And I think it's fair to say that it's not the perfect show. I think you said that already.
Yes.
And we'll get into some criticisms that we might have. And a lot of stuff is subjective. There's something I want to say again at the start of this review. For people who don't know, reviews are someone's subjective opinion on a piece of art. There is no such thing as an objective review. There's two kinds of good reviews in air quotes. One is saying strictly for me what it does for me, and people who think like me might agree. And then the other kind is you look at what the art's trying to be, and you try to compare it to other things that are trying to do that. So like if you're making a children's show, a criticism about how deep the plot line is and how realistic the world is might not matter as much because it's a children's show. And so I think, this is something that Brandon Sanderson talks about when he reviews art, is he says, I'm trying to figure out what the artist was trying to do and how well they accomplished that.
Yeah.
Not how much I necessarily agreed with every decision or like how much I like it. And then you can still say like, well, I think it came up short in these ways.
This review rant brought to you by Mark Zimmerman looking at the comments on the previous videos.
Some people seem to have this idea that like if you disagree that like someone's objectively right or wrong. It's like, no, it's just opinions.
Yeah. We should end our this video, by the way, with a discussion about Jace and Silco, because I know you got into that.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions about Jace, and I have some really good ones that I haven't seen anyone bring up. So we'll save it though.
But no, I think I really enjoyed the animation. I really like the world building. I think they did a good job of depicting Piltover Versan over the series. I agree with you that the characters are really the best part of it. And I think also, even if we are taking what you said, which is like, let's look at what they were trying to accomplish and how well they accomplished it. I think a big part of that like it's great because you don't need this. You can be somebody who doesn't follow League of Legends at all, but them taking the League of Legends lore and world and all that stuff, which quite frankly had a lot of issues. It is been retconned a million times, and building something very great out of that
anyone can enjoy.
Yes. I think that is a huge accomplishment that they made with this, right? Like, I think there are now a lot of people who are incredibly invested in the League of Legends world and IP, some of whom have never played any Riot games before. And this does a great job of onboarding you in and building out this thing that I think people can really care about.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I think getting into some of the Act 3 stuff and some more spoilers, so we've managed to keep it pretty spoiler-free through there. Now we're going to start coming in really hot.
Well, here, really quickly, I just want to know, because I've been this is the first time, for context, that Mark and I did not watch the show together. Act 1, we were at the premiere, but we talked a little bit about it afterwards, but I have no idea. So I want to hear from you right now, specifically Act 3, since we talked 1 and 2 previously. What did you think of Act 3?
I'd say it was more along Act 1 for me, like a 9.5 is what I think I said for Act 1.
I would say like I'm a little, it's I guess recency bias a little bit, because the ending of the final episode 9 is so strong for me that I've been sort of letting it simmer in my mind, and it's hard for me not to feel like Act 3 is near perfect.
Yeah.
It is so good. Like, I think it's by far the strongest act. And I think just how hard they were able to bring the pinnacle scene, the final ending is so good that it's hard to not think it's just a near perfect act.
Yeah, I feel like in beginnings, it's usually more generic in a sense, because you're starting off from somewhere that usually you want audiences to kind of pick up quickly, and then the endings are usually the things that can be really different and new and like, or do something really cool. And I think that's kind of what happened here, whereas I still thought Act 1 established everything you needed to really well. So I think I'm maybe a little hotter on the entire show than you, but I think going to the ending scene, my favorite thing was how well they juxtaposed the two girls. And I feel like a lot of people might not have picked up on it, but Jinx has a really important line in that when she's talking about how both of them want the sister that was their sister 10 years ago, and neither one could accept who they became.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of people are like, no, Vi accepted Jinx. And she's like, no, she wanted Powder. She did not accept what had happened to Jinx, all the trauma she had suffered for the last 10 years. She wanted her regular sister back. And I think Jinx wanted Vi, the sister who accepted her for everything back and didn't like that she had fallen in love with Caitlyn or whatever, and doesn't like how Jinx is now. Like, they both wanted the old version of the other person, and because neither one could do that for the other, they grew apart again. I thought that was just such fucking good writing.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I mean, it's funny because this is both in previous episodes of this, Mark has talked about how he sometimes feels like the writing is a little too on the nose. And you could make that criticism, I think, of the two chairs, where it's like, this is the powder chair, this is the Jinx chair. But I actually thought it worked well in that scene. I thought it was fine. Like, they didn't, even though the names were like written on it, and like, they could have done like a version of it where there's a chair next to Vi and a chair next to Silco or something. I think it still worked for me in that scene. And I think the thing that does so much for me in that scene is the songs, the Sting song. They actually got Sting to go and do the show this song for them, the show, and it's just such a beautiful song that plays along with those final moments that it just ends so strong for me. Yeah,
and I think so. The Silco point, I jokingly tweeted Team Silco. People think I actually thought that he was like a good. I thought it was obvious when I said Team Silco. Silco did nothing wrong.
I don't want to unpack this yet.
No, I'm not going to unpack that. I just mean that, like, I jokingly said that. I used two internet meme phrases that I thought people would pick up on. Some people thought I seriously meant it. He's still clearly a piece of shit, but at the very end, at least you see that he had some values, and that's what makes villains feel good to watch. Is not that they're just mustache twirling evil guys who are always going to do the most evil thing, but to show, like the line about, oh, daughters are so undoing, or whatever he says. Is there anything so undoing as a daughter?
Yeah.
In front of Vander's statue, falling to the same weakness that weakness in air quotes that Vander fell to, because Vander gave it all up to just focus on family and stuff. And so, like, they did a very good job of doing kind of cyclical story arcs for some people, and like ending up where they began kind of things, but doing it in ways that felt good.
So one thing I also told Christian was that the only major disappointment I had with the end of season 1 was that going into it, and we had speculated about this last week, but I wish I had known it was the end of season 1. They refused to call it season 1. In all their marketing and communications, they refused to call it a season. And so in previous episodes, you and I speculated, like, oh, is this going to be
is Victor going to be this guy? Is this going to happen?
And so the fact, like, I give them a ton of credit for the ending, especially when you look at Jinx and Vi, but, like, they resolve very little of these other stories.
Yeah.
And so it left me feeling in some ways a little empty. Once I had accepted it and, like, really focused in on the final scene, that was when I started to feel really great about Act 3. But I did kind of like the Obama meme of, like, this at the end, because I was like, really, that's it? Like, there's so many things up in the air. In fact, they were building things in the final episode, and I just wish I had prepared myself for it.
Yeah, I think I realized that this was going to be a multi-season thing when they introduced Mel's mother, and, like, really started not just making her a random thing, like, a very small thing. She was clearly a major part.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, there's no, like, this is too well written for them to just totally fuck up this ending to the point that they're going to, like, somehow tie all these plot lines up. So I was not surprised when the ending didn't rush the politics to a conclusion, and I much prefer that. So, like, I'm with you that it felt a little weird to not just confirm that there was more seasons coming and that this was not a complete story. So that way I could understand the B plot was not trying to be resolved right now, which is the Piltover Zahn conflict. Because the final thing of this show is the conflict's now on. They just blew up the council. You know, like, this is the incendiary act that will make sure that these two sides of the city can never come together.
Yeah.
And because you weren't sure if they were going to try and wrap up that, like, it just made it a little weird. But fans who go back and watch it now, that there's already season 2 confirmed, will know that not everything's going to get resolved.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Is I think it would have been nicer if they had, like, prepped people for that, because it does feel a little like the cliffhanger feels worse when you don't realize there's an opportunity for it to be a cliffhanger. Yeah. So I think,
like, if you tell me I'm in the first book of a trilogy, it feels a lot better than, like,
wait, I didn't get any of this resolved.
Yeah, that happened to me with Name of the Wind. I remember ending. I was like, "What the hell?" And then, I'm like, "Oh, there's a second book," and then, "Oh, there's never a third book."
Yes.
But yeah, I do appreciate, though, that it is multiple seasons, because the plots that they're trying to tell are way too big to fit in to a single season, 9 episodes with all the politicking and
Yeah.
how they want to be pretty realistic with it.
Yes. And we commented on how it felt rushed, just in the fact that it was just even one season. You know, like they still weren't able to do that. What else did you want to mention about the Act 3 stuff?
No, I think that's mostly it. Like, I really liked where most things went. I mean, there were a lot of shocking moments that happened, like Sky getting evaporated. I think her name was Sky.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. It was Sky. I thought on that scene, in fact, it's funny because I'm pulling out my notes a little bit because I have wrote down a couple ideas after I watched it because I didn't want to forget about them. But the Sky scene, like, most people have not talked about that, or they've memed it a little bit, I think, in some places. But like, that was possibly the saddest part of the show for me, and I know that for other people it was probably something else, but like, just sort of how brutal it was. She was very endearing, and just the fact that it just happened, it was so shocking.
I mean, I think Ashley and I both gasped when it happened, because it went from like it's one of those narrative choices that doesn't need to necessarily go that way, where sometimes you can see the writing on the wall that like Jinx and Vi are just not on the same page unless something really changes. So like, you know, some of those heartbreaks are heartbreak because they're inevitable. This was one where it's like, oh my God, dude, like, God.
Well, and it felt
in a good way.
Almost the callousness of it and the emptiness of it felt even more brutal for me, because it's like, this is a character who we basically never see interact with anybody else.
Just a couple of Victor scenes.
Yeah. And like, there's not, like, it was just sort of almost like a sad, empty death. You know what I mean? Where like, it's not discussed elsewhere. Maybe, I mean, I assume at some point in time, just gonna be like, "Hey, what happened?" By the way, but the fact that it just occurred just quietly on the sidelines, it just felt so sad. And it's not like I had some affinity to that character, but like they did such a good job of building up her. You know, you think she's gonna walk in and see it, and like there's gonna be some sort of moment that occurs from that, like, oh no, and he has to explain it or whatever. You definitely had no idea that was going to be where that went.
Yeah, and then how the Hex Core looked afterwards was so nefarious. Like, it almost was like this pure invention was like visually stained now. Like, it was gross to look at after it did. Like, I thought all that was just really well done to be like, I don't like looking at this thing anymore after it did that to that woman. And it now visually looks like pulsing and gross.
One of the other things I wrote down here was about Heimerdinger.
I was going to go there,
Yeah, the last 2 acts, I think I was getting frustrated. We talked in the last video about how
he just sucked.
He just showed up and kind of like was said. He still did not do anything in this act, and yet I was okay with it because you could see that they were actually like developing his character. That like there was something up. You and I had talked about like maybe he's going to bust out a bunch of rockets or like be part of some big fight scene or something, but the fact that they did the opposite, right, which was may give him these kind of quiet moments of contemplation as he's like walking through the streets of the Undercity and like realizing how detached he's been from what has been going on there, and like realizing he needs to do something about it. I think that was great.
I think what they did with him to set him up for the future seasons is really good, and I much rather have seen them do this than just make him suddenly like Hextech. You know. So he's obviously going to have a really important role in rebuilding Piltover or like helping defend it. Like, you can see a world where he's going to like, if there's a war going on, he'll build turrets for defense. Like, it suddenly makes a lot more sense in like where his arc could go. Whereas before, I think we were both uncomfortable with it because like he's done nothing but be a poo-poo head and just say no to everything. And there's 3 episodes left. Like, what can you realistically do? And this is a much better character arc. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm excited with where they went. What did you think of? So one, I really liked Echo. And we can talk a little bit about him, but I think a good way to lead into that is what were your thoughts on the Echo
versus Jinx fight
sequence?
Okay, so this is going to be controversial, and people are not going to like that I say this because I know people love this fight. And on a technical level, very well done. But it was really out of place for me.
Yes.
It broke me because they suddenly switch art styles.
Yes.
And they play this hype music behind it, and it's like this hype beast moment. And that was so tonally off from what the narrative moment was.
Yes.
Because if people don't know, the way they frame it with the flashbacks, which is beautiful and well done and what they should do, it's like these 2 kids used to be friends together who played a game with paintballs that now they're on opposite sides of a conflict trying to kill each other. And that's a very heavy thing. And to turn it into a hype beast moment, which can fit in like training arcs and like other moments, you know, it's like, it just didn't fit there. And I think the perfect example of what this fight should look like is Kakashi versus Obito. And I know you haven't seen this, but it's in Naruto. It's these two childhood friends, and the fight is very somber. It plays very sad, just violin music, and it flashes back between them doing the same combos as children and as adults, which is what this is doing. But it's acknowledging the fact that this is a tragedy that these two people got ripped apart, rather than like a, oh shit, Morpheus is fighting Neo moment. You know, it's like, I thought it looked really good, but I thought it was a total whiff in like trying to hit me in my core. And then when he beats the shit out of Jinx, it's so brutal again. And I'm like, whoa, we're just like, I don't know. It felt kind of all over the place.
Yeah, it is the part that I had incredibly mixed feelings on, because I did not hate it, I did not love it, but I still felt strongly about it. Right? It was not a neutral thing. And that,
I mean, like clearly it was well done.
Yes,
and clearly a lot of people liked it. But for me,
in the moments where you're seeing like the connection between the two, but for me, I think it was just so it pulled me out of what I was watching. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, there's a music video now randomly in the middle of this. Like that's what it felt like. It had turned into this like music video. And as you said, it felt very totally different. Hilariously, I talked to Broden about it the next day. A mutual friend of ours, very creative guy. That was his favorite part of the whole show.
I think from a creative level, they did something very interesting.
Yeah.
I just thought, like, from a narrative perspective, I'd be like, why would I be excited to, you know?
Yeah, I think if we were not in the middle of what is a very tragic sequence, and it was like
a bridge getting blown up, there are soldiers dying all over the place,
is like leaving and seeing that's happened, and like Jinx,
you're pitting two childhood friends against each other, and then immediately after the hype moment, Echo is bashing her face in pretty brutally. You know, like it just was tonal whiplash for me.
But I do like what they did with Echo.
For sure.
Similar thing to Victor, not on the same level, but for me, like Echo's a character that I've never been particularly interested in, from a I don't know IP perspective or whatever. And I think I'm definitely far more interested in him now. And I feel like his character, they gave him a lot of depth with very few scenes, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I think it was. You could tell that he was someone who was like probably one of the best people morally in the show, who was just really trying his hardest to help the people who actually needed help.
Yes, and also still really cool.
Yeah, while being cool.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I loved Echo as a character, and I still liked everything that they did with him narratively. It was just that one style choice that I didn't jive with too hard, but that was my only complaint with that part.
And Broden did point out to me that it is pretty cool that even I will acknowledge the fact that like Echo doesn't have the ability to rewind time like he does in the League of Legends game, which hopefully is not a spoiler. It's just a thing that's in the League of Legends game.
I don't think it matters.
But that it was still kind of like him using the ultimate and the way that it went down.
It was a little weird for me because I'm looking at it from the perspective of people who don't know he has the ability to rewind time, and you'd probably be like, huh? Or like, you know, it would be a little weird. And I think, you know, it's a fine nod for us and something that's not going to be too jarring. For like, that's one of the times where like an Easter egg I'm fine with, even though I don't want to make it sound like I'm criticizing it. I liked that choice, but it's something that I think there's a couple times where things happen and you might go, huh? If you hadn't played the game and didn't know that someone had a power.
Silco's arc was fantastic. I really loved him as a character. I think he's fantastic.
Yep.
I think the fact that he dies at the end is like, I'm satisfied with the death, because I feel like over the course of that, like he did such a great job of exemplifying the struggle in so many ways. Like he was a great asset for the Piltover Undercity struggle. He was a great asset for like the struggle for Jinx versus Powder with Vi and him. Like he just did so much as a side character.
He was like so I would argue he was probably the third main character of the if you start ranking characters. Like Vi's obviously one of the most important, Jinx is one of the most important, and then it's between Silco and Jace, and I think they're actually supposed to kind of rival each other a little bit as they're like comeuppance in their individual areas, where Jace ascends through Piltover and he ascends through Zaun.
Yeah, and then at the very end, fifth.
Well, then they're arguing against each other. Who would you put? Who would you put?
Victor. I think it goes.
No, Victor got less screen time than Silco.
I'm not talking about screen time, but I'm just talking about. I personally felt like in the show you had Vi and Jinx as like
the core story,
the A main characters. You had Jinx and Jace and Victor as the B main characters, and then you had Silco as a side character, is what I would call him. And yet they did so much with him.
I mean, the Jace plotline encompasses a lot, so it's hard to say how much of that is Victor's versus, like, in theory, you could tell a lot of that story without Victor there.
Yeah.
Not that it would be better, but just, like, if you lumped Victor out of that whole story somehow, the plot would largely still progress similarly.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought the politicking between the two sides was more of Jace's plot line, whereas Victor was doing kind of his own thing.
I really loved. Well, here I'll say this really quickly while we're on the Silco topic. I thought for a second there was a moment in the final episode where I thought Silco was going to try to do what Vander did, and whenever he's like, "I need somebody," and I thought Silco was going to give himself up because it would have such perfectly mirrored the Vi and Vander decision that was made towards the end. And like, even if he had come to that conclusion and then like things went awry like they did for Vander, I thought it was interesting.
They could have done that, I think.
I'm not saying they should have. It was just like kind of where my mind was going because they had mirrored stuff so much, and I liked the interaction between. It was really cool when you got to see Jace and Silco. Like, come together. And
someone pointed this out, and I think it was a Reddit thread somewhere, but I really liked how they showed Silco not just being like the ultimate cool thug badass.
Yeah.
When his underling, Savika, I think her name is, almost betrays him, he's giving this speech about loyalty, and then she swings her blade, and you see him like tweaking out about like, oh my god, that was almost me. And he goes, were you tempted? And she's like, yeah, maybe a little bit.
It's a really great scene.
Yeah, and it shows that like even when he's trying to look in control, you know, he acknowledges that like he doesn't have everything totally unlocked.
Right. Yes.
Whereas sometimes the villain character feels like they can predict everything that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I like that even when he wins sometimes, he's like, oh, whoo, I got out of that one.
And you can, like, the whole time you sense he's losing, like, control of Jinx. He's, like...
losing control of the people around him.
Yeah. It's like it is... Like, the pieces are kind of falling around him, and yet he still has to present this, like, good front. I think it's good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes, which is funny because it's just, like, they kill it at the end, unfortunately, is the only scene, I think, in the entire show where we get to see our characters become their champions. And that's the Jace and Vi battle sequence, which felt so good to watch. Like, that was definitely... I don't want to say... Like, I thought it was a good scene. It's not fan service for the sake of fan service, but that was definitely, like, here you go, League of Legends fans. Like, you get your characters, you know?
And I think it works for non-viewers, too, who are, like, they've been building up this technology the whole time.
That's what I mean.
Gloves have been there. Like, you know, they're like, oh, they could make good weapons, and you finally get to see it. I did think that fight scene... Like, I liked that fight scene more than the Jinx Echo one.
Yeah, my favorite fight scene in the show was definitely that.
Yeah, just seeing them kind of become their characters and fight some mooks.
Yeah, it feels so much like whenever Iron Man puts on his suit for the first time, or you know, like Captain America does the shield. You're like, you know where it's going, and just finally realize
like Vi's been this brawler. Chills. She picked up the weaker versions in Act 1. Now she's got the souped up ones. You know, like there's a lot there.
And like especially the way they set it up, where like all the enforcers just get plowed down, and then it's like Jason and Vi are like, okay, our turn, and then you just see them like go crazy.
So that does lead to some of the criticisms, though, because that scene wasn't perfect for me.
Oh, really? Okay.
And this starts getting to the Jace stuff. If you want to get
are we going to talk about the like murder of the kid?
No. I mean, it's other stuff. You tell me if you're ready for my spiel.
Yeah. I guess
are you ready for me to spiel or
all
something else?
I will say really quickly on the wrap up of that was. Are you talking about the Silco Jace spiel? Is that what you're referencing, or something different?
Something, but it's mostly just about Jace. I really don't have... People think I defend Silco versus Jace. It has nothing to do with Silco at all.
Well, anyway, I think one thing that was surprising to me was the fact that, like... it's very rare in a book or a show or a movie where, like, you kill a kid and then it's kind of brushed off. And, like, I know that it's used as a pivot point for Jace to realize he can't just charge in the way Vi wants him to, but like I am surprised that he was like it was almost more of like a decision that he made where he's like, oh yeah, this is not going to work, you know. It was like whenever Silco calls him out on it, he's like, you don't have the stomach for it. He's like, no, I would just slaughter you guys. It's not like he's like, yeah, I don't. It's like, yeah, oops, like I killed a kid or whatever, you know. It's like there was not any ruminating on that.
I do think Vi line to him summed it up well enough for me, which she's like, what the fuck did you think was going to happen when we came down here? Like, this is what all your decisions do. You just don't realize it because you're up in your ivory tower. And I thought that was a good line delivered by her. And so there's a couple ways I can tackle this Jace thing, because I
was going to say the other thing is it's really weird to me that the Chem Baron had their kid working the factory. That was a little distracting to me.
I don't know. Kids work factories historically all the time.
Yeah, but it's the Chem Baron.
So, like, what does he care?
It's her, but
you mean the
fact that it was like,
I was
like, that was their kid. Like, this person is
one of the most powerful people
ruling
in the
Undercity, and it's just like the random kid was working in this factory. I'm like, that would not happen.
Yeah. I mean, but that's nitpicking kind of a little bit. Like it's like
kind of
a little bit of a weird thing.
Anyway, okay, fine.
Okay, so my problem with Jace, there's two parts. One, I still would argue that like some of his character development and plot stuff was rushed, and it still, I think you can see, wasn't timelined out very well, in the sense that a bunch of things happen in the course of 2 days, and there's never really any time where there's a gap in what's happening, and there seems to be a break. And then suddenly in one of the council scenes, Jace is like, "We've been talking for weeks," and it's like, bro, you were you became a counselor 2 days ago. When did you time skip to weeks? I am so confused. I think if you like really start stepping back from his scenes, they don't make a ton of sense. He saw the bridge battle and vomited at the sight of the dead people, and then with no combat training, builds a hammer and starts fighting Shimmer empowered mooks up close and like doing really complex move where he's like hitting them with the base of the hammer and switching it around. If he just had a gun and shot them, I would have still been fine on like a skill set level. And this is not about like the realism of like their fighting techniques, but more a character point. Like if this person has shown no competency, it pulls me out a little bit to suddenly see them doing something where they've been an academic. He's a scientist.
Yeah, Victor even says we're scientists, not soldiers or whatever. And then like
suddenly
15 minutes later, it's
he's
like
fighting
he's
not just normal people. He's fighting Shimmer empowered super soldiers, just like wah-bah! It threw me a little bit. On top of the emotional beat that like he was throwing up the day before at the sight of bloodshed, and now he's literally killing people himself up close.
Yeah,
I think that they because of the plot that was going on around him, they needed to accelerate these moments. And on an individual level, none of them are that bad, but like because so much else is happening in the story, they don't give the political side the space that it actually needs.
Yeah, or
breathe.
his just development, like,
or his actual
there
emotional
needs to be
development.
more stuff for him to like.
A great example would be like if you took a moment, and this goes into his corruption thing, where he instantly folds. It's his first day at council. No one's actually threatened him. Mel's like, it's just dangerous to piss people off, and he goes, "Oh, okay, I'll do whatever you say." Here's what I would pitch as like a fix. Is like if he actually got threatened physically and even beaten up or had an assassination attempt, he decides to go train, and then he folds the corrupt side because he's like, fuck, I'm still scared for my life kind of thing. And I think like the show had so much to do, they couldn't really give Jace's plot line the development needed.
I took the corruption thing more as like he wanted them to vote in favor of him being able to like build weapons or do the things that Heimer didn't want him to do, and so that's why he was like, okay, I have to let these guys do what they do so that I can get what I want. It was less of like a danger thing, but it still is fair that like in the course of 3 days or 4 days or whatever and
then suddenly weeks, it's just kind of muddled. I think that having more space would have helped. So and I've seen other people on other subreddits who are not League subreddits notice some of these plotline issues more because they're less in tune with like who this character is supposed to be.
Right.
Like I saw on the Cosmere subreddit and some of the fantasy subreddits. So the other thing with Jace, and this is the big problem I have with him, is he is so much more of an asshole than anyone realizes. And the best way I can highlight this is the final decision he makes in the show. Okay? He goes down the Undercity, right? On this unsanctioned raid, and he kills people, and then he accidentally kills a kid. And he goes, oh shit, I don't know these people very well. I don't know what their living conditions are like. I should help them somehow, right? And he cooks up a plan, and he goes, I'm going to hand the entire city over to the drug lord who is ruining that community, break them off from Piltover completely, wipe my hands of it, and then quit my job. That is such a dickhead move, isn't it? Instead of helping the people, here's what I would pitch if I was a good leader. I would start talking to the people I don't understand. I would bring them up to the council and interview them and what needs they have and what they're struggling with. And then maybe use some of those resources that we've been gathering and hoarding for ourselves by cutting corrupt deals under the table with trade people and all these inventions that I have that I said I was going to give to the common people, and now all the barriers are out of the way and I still haven't done it. I would actually help the people and try and bridge the gap between the two communities instead of cut them off and hand the entire city over to the drug overlord.
I think the way I took it is he realizes that Silco's in charge. He realizes that there's no way to actually help or interact with that city other than go to war.
But
and then he sees what war is going to be.
See, that's my point, though. Is every single time Jace has a decision to make, he chooses the easiest possible thing he can do, or he lets someone else make the decision for him. He listens to Mel. He listens to Mel's mom. He listens to Heimerdinger at different points. He listens to Vi for no reason. He's like, let's go do a raid. And he's like, okay, I'm in there.
Well, he wants to do something. And
I know. But my point is that like
you can do.
You can convince him to do anything. And anytime there's any pressure, after like the corruption thing, he folds right away and just does what people want.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me in some way because he's been suddenly thrust into a position of power.
Right,
you know,
and so
like
this
very
is
flexible, the trope of like the very flexible leader or whatever.
Yeah, the arc that they've painted for him, which is what the show wants you to think, is that he's an idealist who generally wants to do the right thing, but is swept up in politics, is out over his head, and makes some mistakes, but then to the realization is like, this is what I have to do for peace. But I really don't think that's a good, like, you can honestly say that's a good solution. Is just sign the Undercity over to Silco, because Silco's not going to keep his agreement to stop manufacturing. He says, oh yeah, I'll stop doing Shimmer, but like, why would you trust Silco? You know, like, I think Jace is actually a total fucking asshole in that moment when he negotiates a peace treaty without consulting anyone else, goes into the council and guys, I just did an unsanctioned raid, but here's what I'm going to do. And somehow, because it's more dramatic, the whole council starts raising their hand right before they all get blown up. I'm like, how did he convince them to do this? Like, that whole thing is so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
So I agree with like the rushed aspect of them agreeing to the peace treaty or whatever. Though I will say that obviously that council is like in a crazy, very chaotic place. They've just removed Heimerdinger.
Yeah, I mean, like, they're doing a bunch of weird shit.
Yeah. And he's bought them off in some ways by allowing their corruption and all this stuff. But it also, there's the question of just like how much value does the Undercity have to Piltover? It doesn't ever really seem.
Well,
like...
they rely on their mining. That's the whole thing. Is that they go into the fissures, and the upper city exploits the lower class to do the manual labor that they then use.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I don't see how you can claim to be an idealist with a good moral compass and then not help the people who need help, and instead just say, fuck it, I don't understand them and I'm not going to try, I'm going to hand the city over.
Yeah, I mean, my vibe is basically like, if you want to, I perceive it, and I'm not saying that this is like a good argument, but I perceive it is, Vi's like, if you want to help the Undercity, you have to go up against Silco. And then he goes down there and is like, there's no way to separate. Like,
I understand.
He looks up. There's that scene where he looks up at all the Undercity denizens and realizes that like there's not as much of a delineation between Silco and the rest of the Undercity as like Vi would have him believe. And so then that is why. And so he's like, I can't, like, war is not tenable. And not only that, but he has that moment where he goes like, I've realized what brought us together, because I think instead of Mel's mother being like, oh, you really need to go to war, he takes it in the opposite direction of like, I need them to be independent and strong so that we can challenge Noxus if we need to. And so I also think that is part of the reason why he makes it, and that's why he has that line of like, I realized what brought us together. It was like the outside. So
on the point about he doesn't think he can save the Undercity, I understand that's his perspective. I'm saying that's an awful perspective for a leader to have. Like, you're straight up just not a good leader and probably not a good person if you think that that's like what you should do to help people who are under the thumb of a drug lord.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're in tough situations, and you're like, I don't know if I can help them. So you just don't try. They never tried. And that's my whole point. Is he just gives up every time.
Well, this is, I mean, maybe as a means of wrapping this up, I will, because obviously we can go back and forth, but this is like a decision that like national governments make all the time. It's like, do you, like the U.S. and other areas have to do deals with...
Well, so the other thing, yeah, it's complicated. I'm not trying to say it's not complicated, but like clearly he's taking the easiest way out that he possibly can. And the other thing is, people say he's an idealist, but I would argue, like, what is his ideal that drives him? You know?
He just wants to help people.
But he doesn't. He outright expresses disdain and loathing for the Undercity people after the bridge attack to Victor, who's like, bro, I'm from the Undercity. And then the problem for why he couldn't get his tools in the hands of the people who needed them was that Heimerdinger was slowing the research progress down. And as soon as that's out of the way, the little gemstone and all of them get taken, and he goes, oh my god, this can be used to build other things. I'm an idiot, and I can't help the people I wanted to help.
Well, there's the rising threat of the Undercity. Like, in the beginning, he doesn't even think of the Undercity as a threat.
Right, but...
And then as he gets put in a position of leadership, he now has to consider the threat.
And then he doesn't want to help
perspective.
Them.
Yes, it changes his perspective.
But my point is, if you're not an idealist, if your perspective is, I want to help people, and then every time there's a struggle, you go, I can't help them, then you're just a piece of shit.
But idealism goes out the window whenever somebody bombs your city.
He already wasn't helping them as soon as Act 2 started. As soon as Heimerdinger was out of the way, he was already off the train of trying to help people. And wasn't he building the glove with Victor in part so at
that
the very beginning of Act 2, and
then
as soon as Heimerdinger says no, he's like, oh shit, we can't do it. And then once they remove Heimerdinger, he only does it to help Victor. And that was his main motivation. But then once Heimerdinger's out of the way, why doesn't he give the tools?
I think he gets pulled away from the research because he has to go be a leader.
Right, but
part of it is just because of how compressed this stuff is.
Yeah.
But like, I just don't.
Once Heimerdinger's out of the way, what's stopping him from launching a new sales line of Atlas gloves?
Because he's like busy dealing with like I think he is getting drawn out of the idealistic world and by being like it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Like that's the path that he goes down.
Yeah.
But I don't think he abandons those good intentions along the way.
I don't think he ever does. I think he does. I don't think he ever does anything good in the show. This is my point with Jace, is that if you examine his actions, there's always a reason for him to choose the bad one, and he always does it.
I don't think like I look at it this way. You're looking at it as like he abandons the people of the Undercity because what he decides he doesn't want to help them. I look at it as he comes out of a moment where he's literally committed like a terrible act, gone rogue, and realizes like that is not compatible. So then he chooses this other option. He wants to create these things. Heimerdinger says that he can't. And so he does this corruption thing, and so that he could try to build those things. I get that he doesn't then rush to the lab and start like building 5 more gloves.
He's not like,
But that's because like everything's happening in 2 days, which is a flaw of the show.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't think his character is just like. It's certainly not written with the intention of him being the asshole that I think so many people think.
I don't think he's written to be an asshole, and that's why I think I have some issues with him, is because I think if you step back and examine his choices, like what often happens in the show is like, there's one thing picked and people don't like examine, well, what else could that character have done?
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of moments, whether due to the pacing reasons or the actual writing, I'm like, Jace could have done something else there. But the thing is, in filmmaking especially, you have a lot of narrative tricks at your disposal to inform people what to think beyond the character choices. Silco has bad posture, he's disfigured, he works from the shadows, he has a lot of lines where he says mean things, and then you play dark ominous tones when he's on screen. Jace has a square jawline and a nice back, and he works in the bright environment, and says nice idealistic things, and he has nice music behind him when he's trying to do the right things. And then when you actually go and like, what did he do in this show? You're like, wait, he was a total piece of shit the entire way through.
I mean, he's not murdering people for vengeance.
He murdered people for vengeance.
You said through the entire way throughout the show, and I'm like, it's just not true that like. In
starting in Act 2. Act 1, he was fine.
Yeah. Act 2 is when he starts making the compromises. But again, I feel like that's the road to hell paved in good intentions thing. Obviously we disagree a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think he's a horrible person, and he's the nefarious evil at the top of food chains that people don't think about.
Well, I don't think that they're gonna continue him that way.
No,
I
don't think so either.
Final thoughts on this stuff, and I guess looking forward to season 2. Obviously, sad that they are not doing it next year. I'm a little worried at the pace at which they can produce these things, because.
That's, I think, the biggest question mark.
Because people are like, I'm just so happy that they're taking their time, and I'm also like, people can say that also about Patrick Rothfuss. I don't know if I've, you know what I mean? Like, not to say that I think like Christian Lincoln, Alex E, and like the whole Fortiche team are going to go sit on an island somewhere for like a year, but I'm a little worried that they can't ride this momentum. Part of the reason why Marvel has been successful is because they come out
so
with
many ships in the
they come you continue to feel like you're invested because you've got multiple things coming out every year, and they play off of each other, and it's nice. And so I know that it's early days for Riot, but I am a little worried about that, especially because it's not like they're like coming in 2023. They're like not ready in 2022. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because part of the reason it took 6 years was just like scaling up the studio that made it. Because I heard they went from like 20 employees to 300 or something.
There's a million reasons why.
Yeah. But then what portion of that is also just that it was hard to make?
Yeah. Like, this animation, like it takes 6 months to make every episode from an animation perspective,
and like you have a lot more time to storyboard and to work on the writing.
So we're not saying it's going to take 6 years, but I am just
it's just
worried
like,
about like
you're now compressing it down.
Yeah,
and so I think if there's a small drop off in season 2, I wouldn't be surprised. But like I have a lot of faith. I bet a lot of the story's already written. In that way, it's a lot about the production side more than the planning.
Yeah, I'm very curious when they say it's in production. How far into production, because you could say something is in production when they have an outline and they're sending it in emails to each other.
There's a lot of things in Hollywood that are in production and have not done anything.
Right, right. And their definition of in production obviously might be different.
Their definition of production is usually actually pretty strictly like when you start.
Yeah. So we'll see. I hope they can recover from where they left off okay, because if it's just like the missile's coming and Jace just like swings his hammer and sends the missile the other way, like obviously there's going to be some ramifications, but like I'm a little worried at how cheesy it's going to feel, because you can't kill Jace, you can't kill Victor. Mel probably survives, quite frankly.
Oh, she's dead. The rocket went straight onto her.
So there's some, and I know this is coming from the same people who theorized that Twitch and Singed and
Warwick,
and everyone was going to be Swain. Everyone was going to be making these appearances in this thing, but there is some theory that like the like stuff that is engraved on Mel's body, it looks like stuff from the like Solari symbols or something like that. So there's a question that she might have some sort of shield or something, and it's not that far fetched to think that like a Noxian princess daughter lady will have some sort of defense, because you have to figure out how she survives, or you have to figure out how Victor and Jace survives, and her having some sort of defense I think could help with it.
I would almost just say I expect Jace or Victor to have some sort of like, Victor has some weird
Victor almost certainly will like transform, glorious evolution himself out of the injuries he's about to sustain.
Right. I assume that like everyone in the council dies but Jace and Victor, maybe some, hex tech shield that Jace has on his wrist. Like I'm okay with whatever little gadgetry they do to save Jace. If they start saving like multiple members of the council beyond Jace and Victor.
I'm also just worried that they're going to make Jace like Piltover King, because the council will be gone. And I'm like, I really feel like they need to move him out of this leadership role because of some of the problems that it's created. Not just oh, he's a bad leader or something like that, but it's just like they have him in too many roles right now, doing too many things. And I think that I was ready for him to like move out of that. So if they're like, no, now he's also the ruler of Piltover and is like defending against Noxus or something, I'm like, ugh.
I'm hoping it's more like Heimerdinger comes back and he's been working with Echo and he understands the people better now. Like what a good leader should do.
Yeah. They're united against Piltover, or sorry, against Noxus or something like that.
Or Zon, because I think the main conflict is still going to mostly be.
Well, there's a power vacuum in both cities now.
Yeah, like both leaderships are dead.
Which could mean that things get better.
And there's open hostilities.
Heimer and Echo like maybe come in and save some stuff or something. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? But I would expect this to be the, like I said before, the boiling point for the conflict between the two, and why Zon becomes its own nation, because they literally blow up the leadership from the other city.
Yeah.
So.
I really like what they're doing with Caitlyn and Vi. I'm definitely shipping them hard.
They better. I'm glad they didn't. It's like a weird thing on one hand, because you're like, I'm glad they didn't rush their relationship, because there's so much going on.
Yeah, it would have been weird if it's like
they make out
they're
after.
They're making out within just 2 days of them meeting each other,
or weeks even. Who knows? But at the same time, it also goes like potentially queer baiting, which is also problematic. So I'm hoping they come together in season 2, and then you can say, hey, it was just a normal like written relationship,
natural evolution.
Yeah.
Vi getting kidnapped for the 3rd time in the show was a little frustrating too.
Wait, she got kidnapped by
Jinx
again. Yeah,
and every time at the last episode of every act, I'm like, please, never let Vi get kidnapped again, or knocked out, or taken someplace else. I think we've had enough of that. I'm kind of surprised that nobody brought that up. But
it's just one of those things where so much is happening.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, in the writers' room, I'm surprised that they weren't like, guys, can we really have her getting kidnapped in Act 2 if she's getting kidnapped in 1 and 3?
Yeah, can she just
Can't she just like follow them or something like that?
Like, oh no, I saw Caitlyn get kidnapped or something, so I went there.
Yeah, you follow and then you get like captured, or it's even if it's not kidnapping, it's just like they come up behind you and like have a gun to your head or something. I don't know. It's just.
Yeah,
it's a little. There's definitely some growing pains.
And then you wake up with the blinking eye camera shot every time, or I guess they had the bag over their head for this 3rd.
Yeah. Okay. Anything from the Twitch chat that you guys think we should be talking about? I wonder how they will introduce characters like Ziggs, Camille, Oriana. I don't know. I do like. There's some big questions around Warwick. This was the first episode where we kind of got that tease.
We saw his skin.
Yes.
I mean, the Oriana thing too. They showed Singed looking at a picture of a girl that looked like Oriana. I think some of these are just for us to like fan nerd out on.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect them to actually wrap all these plot lines in, though. I think some could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think Mel's mom is referring to Urgot. I'm pretty sure it's Swain. To answer that take.
Oh yeah.
I don't think they're going to kill main characters. I feel like they're going to have plot armor.
That's probably one of my only concerns about the show is that any
League of Legends character champion.
Yeah, can't die.
Yeah.
Whereas like any new character you introduce in season 2, I assume will die.
Yeah.
Because you need to build up my investment to then kill them later on.
Yeah, you need characters to kill, and they're probably never going to be champions.
Yeah, so I hope they start to kill champions.
Yeah. People say it's safe to assume that Vander's work. I don't know yet. I mean, it maybe, but it's just like they didn't. In my opinion, they did not do enough breadcrumbing in season 1 to make me feel confident that he was going to show up in season 2. But we'll see.
Time jumps. Victor running beside the boat, but then he's back on his stick. Yeah, there were some things like that where I don't know if maybe he was trying to hide that he could now run.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Well, anyway, this concludes our review of Arcane season 1. Please tune in 2025. Mark and I will be
That's
in
not
our
6 years.
we'll be doing it in the Travis Gafford Industries mansion, and in our special studio. So stay tuned for all the production upgrades we're going to be making between now and season 2. I don't know, anything else we should say?
No, this was a lot of fun. I like talking about things.
It's great. I'm really happy about Arcane. I'm really happy.
Yeah, this is sick. It's legitimately to conclude thoughts, one of the best shows I've watched in a long time.
And I think it's I don't know, it's fun to think about where my mind was at before I sat down to watch the first episode, and then like what it did.
It went
for me
from being like, I hope this doesn't embarrass us, to like, hey.
Yeah. Like, why aren't more people reviewing this? More people need to be aware of how good it is. So hats off to the show writers, Christian and Alex. I'm trying to get an interview with them and some of the other folks and some of the voice actors. So if you like this, subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out, because there should be some cool stuff coming soon. We are done.